everyone. I'm Trisalyn Nelson. I'm a professor in geography at UC Santa Barbara. And the last year, I've been working with a team of veterinary researchers on a project to try and understand what's the impact of theft on bicycling behavior. So lots of cities are really focused on trying to increase the amount of transportation trips taken by bicycling. But if you've ever had your bike stolen, you know that this can be a very painful experience. So the last stolen bike in our household was a couple years ago. We rode our bikes as a family to the movie theater, and we locked up our bikes. And I had this like super beautiful bike. It's like the prettiest bike you've ever seen. It's green. It's really lovely. And when we came out of the movie theater, my bike was still there, but my son's bike, which he was maybe 10 at the time, so it wasn't a super big bike. His bike was stolen. And I remember the look on his face when we got there, and he's like, "Mom, where's my bike?" And it just was such a weird moment when you realize that your bike has been stolen. And then his eyes filled with tears. And it's also like bikes are pretty great, so it's devastating when your bike gets stolen. So that was really sad. And we had to figure out, how are we going to get him to school without a bike? How were we ever going to ride our bike to that movie theater again? No, we never did again. And so it just, has been in the back of my mind that this relationship between having your bike stolen and riding, it's actually kind of real. There's also places that my husband will say, "Oh, I don't want to ride my bike there because I like my bike too much and I think it'll get stolen in that location." So, it actually in my family life, it kind of controls some of where we'll ride. So we did a study. I partnered with Dylan Fitch-Pulse from UC Davis on a theft project, and we brought in a number of collaborators who helped us with various aspects of this study, and we're going to share some of the findings today. So I think one thing to note is that not all of this research is fully published. So I'm going to present some sort of preliminary findings, and I feel really confident about them, but they're not, I can't reference them in the peer-reviewed literature yet because they're still under review. But I think we found some interesting things that can help if you are tasked with trying to increase bicycling in your own community. So obviously, there's lots of great reasons to get people on bikes. It's good for their physical health. It's good for the environment. It makes lots of economic sense. But there are concerns about bicycle thefts. And so just, in addition to my own narrative, I would say that there is literature that shows that particularly for new riders, concerned about theft can be a deterrent from bicycling. But we don't really have a deep understanding about how that works. But what's the relationship between having your bike stolen and how you might make your decisions about riding in the future? It's probably really important right in this moment in time to understand this relationship because we have seen such growth in e-biking. So e-bike sales are up. You definitely see them in communities like Santa Barbara, where I live. You see them everywhere. We've done just a few sort of pilot surveys where we actually put students out to count the number of bikes and to classify what percentage of bikes are e-bikes. And in some of the popular e-biking spots, we're seeing 50% of the bikes out there are e-bikes. And e-bikes often, not always, but often cost more than a typical pedal bike. And so the impacts of theft obviously also increase. So it is an important time to understand theft. So we are trying to answer two questions in this work. The first is to try and understand, when you get your bike stolen, how does that impact your ridership? And the second is to see if there's any patterns in terms of having your bike recovered that could help us improve recovery in the future. So one of the reasons that I think this is not that well understood, or that the impact of theft on ridership might not be that well understood, is because it's difficult to get data on bike thefts. They're chronically underreported. You might feel, I think, that there's not really any point in reporting it anywhere. But we partnered with BikeIndex. So BikeIndex is a nonprofit bicycle registration company that's really registers bikes in order to help people find their bikes when they are stolen. And so luckily, BikeIndex knows lots of people and has some emails who have had their bikes stolen. So we partnered with BikeIndex to send out a survey that asked people, once your bike is stolen, what happens in terms of your riding, and did you get it recovered? And if you did, how? And so mostly these surveys went out through email lists that BikeIndex had, but we also promoted the survey online through Facebook and Instagram. We asked 4 groups of questions. So we asked people to report on their demographics. So, age, income, gender, race, and ethnicity. We asked some questions about where and when the bike was stolen and how long it took them to notice. We asked questions about what kind of bike they had. Was it an e-bike? How expensive was that bike? And then for people who had their bikes recovered, we asked some questions around, what was involved that led to that recovery. We had over 1,800 people respond from across North America, 61% men, 36% women, and 1% non-binary people responded. Most of the people were European ethnicity, and many of the people had a bachelor degree or higher. And that could partly be because we're at a university. Sometimes we attract people at a university, but it may also have to do with the communities in which BikeIndex has registered lots of bikes. So I don't think that this is the final word, but it certainly is going to allow us to generate some hypotheses that we can continue to work on to better understand the relationship between theft and ridership. So the first thing to note is that we found that the majority of bikes, 41%, were stolen overnight. This is as compared to sort of afternoon, morning, evening. It's really those nighttime hours that seem to lead to the thefts. And most of the thefts also, the highest proportion of theft locations were actually from a shed or inside a garage. So my first point is, if you are storing your bike in a shed or garage, put a lock on it as well, if you want to reduce the probability of theft. We also found outdoor bike racks were common, but I actually expected these to be flipped. I thought that the outdoor bike racks would be more problematic, but I think the garage and shed is interesting because people basically, once they're in, they have cover when they're stealing a bike. And also maybe some of the bikes that we're storing indoors are higher value items. Most of the time bikes were locked, but only 59% of the time, which is interesting. I perhaps because I work on a campus, I would never leave my bike unlocked. Cable locks and U-locks were the most commonly used locks in the study as well. We found 15% of bikes were recovered. Now, this is a higher proportion than we've seen in the literature before, which is closer to 5%. Some of this could be because we contacted so many people that had registered their bikes. So I think this is a little bit biased towards the impact of BikeIndex or bike registration. But along with this 15%, we did see that people who made an effort to recover their bike in multiple ways had a better chance. And that's better chance of recovery. And that's perhaps not surprising, but I think the thing that stands out is it's like a combination of getting the police involved, having your bike registered, and also reporting it on social media. And people sometimes think that there's no point to make an effort to find their bike, and 15% recovery is still relatively low. But I think the message here is get your bike registered, and also coordinated effort that involves the police is helpful. We found that 40% of people who have their bike stolen ride less. This is most impactful for people that are new to riding or only have one bike, and also people who obviously don't recover their bike are more prone to riding less. So I think this is interesting because it's certainly what we saw even in my own family when one of our bikes got stolen. There were some places that we weren't going to ride anymore, and de facto we're riding less. If you only have one bike, which I'm guessing most people only have one bike, very sad as someone who loves bikes. But people can't, afford a garage full of bikes. And so it's really those people with fewer options that are probably most impacted by this. And also, if you're new to biking, that's pretty discouraging. There's lots of research that shows if you're new to biking and you have a near miss, it really scares you. You're less likely to get back on your bike. And the emotional turmoil of having your bike stolen, it's not surprising that it has a similar effect. So I think my message here is that if you are interested in increasing ridership in your city, especially attracting new ridership, safe bike parking is going to be critical. So I just want to give a shout out to our good friends at Move Santa Barbara County for all their bike valets, because I think that, what this research is showing is that a bike valet can be incredibly helpful in terms of minimizing negative impacts from theft. We asked people, what did they do for bike rides? What did they replace their bike trips with? So when they didn't have a bike anymore, did they get in their car? Did they not take the trip? Did they walk there? We were really interested in thinking about this from an active travel perspective. So 64% of women who had a bike stolen, they replaced those trips with some kind of non-active mode. So this would be more like getting in your car and driving somewhere. But for men, there was still over half, 51% of men also replaced their trips with non-active modes. So I think another indication that, bike theft will most likely lead to more driving. When bikes are not recovered, 25% of bikes are not replaced, or they're replaced with bikes of lesser value. Now, the lesser value, it could be because you couldn't afford to buy a bike that was the same value as the one you originally had, or it could be because you're fed up and you want a bike that you're less sad when it gets stolen. So we don't really know what that is, but or the reason for that. But we do know if 25% of bikes are not replaced, that means that those people no longer have the option to choose biking for transportation. And so again, if our goal is to increase bicycling, theft is really something that we need to address. So in conclusion, I guess what we found is that, theft obviously impacts bicycling behavior. And this is going to be particularly true for people with low incomes and also for new bicyclists. So if we really want to support all inclusive bicycling, create more opportunities for biking, and I think this is something that we need to consider. And so investing in safe parking, bike valets, other theft mitigation strategies will be important for biking. And then thanks. We look forward to connecting with you. Let us know if you have any questions. We're really grateful for the funding from the University of California Institute for Transportation Studies and to all of our partners who've helped us complete this work.